to the 2024 Iowa City Book Festival presented by the Iowa City UNESCO City of Literature. We would like to thank the sponsors and partners that made this event possible: the City of Iowa City, the University of Iowa, the Iowa City Public Library, Prairie Lights, Iowa Public Radio, the Graduate Hotel, and Think Iowa City. Support is provided by the National Endowment for Arts and the Iowa Arts Council, which exists within the Iowa Economic Development Authority. Today we are at the panel discussion, Sense of Place. In this panel, writers will discuss place and setting as a key in many kinds of writing. They will explore the following questions. How do you convey a sense of writing, a sense of place, or paint a unique landscape? In what ways does location contribute to your writing? Can a literary work truly be universal, or will place always determine how a piece is understood? Now please welcome our moderator, Kate DeSherry.
Okay, so welcome to the panel, Sense of Place. I'm going to introduce your panelists and then repose the questions to them. So we have Forrest Gander, who is the author of numerous books of poetry, including Red Start in Ecological Poetics and Science and Steepleflower. His collection Be With won the 2019 Pulitzer Prize. He also writes novels, essays, and translates. Gander co-edited Lost Roads Publishers with his late wife, C.D. Wright, for 20 years. Is that right? C.D.
Yeah.
Wright for 20 years, soliciting, editing, and publishing books by more than 30 writers. His latest book is Mojave Ghost. Next to Forrest, we have Catarina Gomez, who is a nonfiction and fiction writer from Portugal. She is the author of 4 nonfiction books, most recently A Finger Smudged with Ink. Her award-winning debut novel, Little Lands, was published in 2022. 3 of her books are included in the Portuguese government's National Reading Plan. Gomez worked as a journalist at the daily newspaper Público for 19 years, was a 2-time finalist for the Gabriel Garcia Marquez Journalism Prize, and was awarded the King of Spain Prize in 2016. She is a fall 2024 writer-in-residence at the University of Iowa's International Writing Program. Next to her, we have Nurit Castellan. Nurit is a poet, a fiction writer, an editor, and bookseller from Argentina. She is the author of the novel Tanto, which was the recipient of an honorable mention for the National Award for Literature from the Fondo Nacional de las Artes and several poetry collections, including Awaiting Major Events, published in English in 2021. She is also a fall 2024 writer-in-residence at the International Writing Program. Next to Nurit is Chris Offutt, who is the author of 2 collections of short stories, 3 memoirs, and 6 novels. His books have been translated into 12 languages and won 4 international awards. His most recent work is the acclaimed Mick Hardin series from Grove Atlantic. He also wrote screenplays for True Blood, Weeds, and Treme. He is taught in a number of MFA programs, including the Iowa Writers Workshop, and is professor emeritus at the University of Mississippi. He grew up in the hills of eastern Kentucky and now lives in Iowa City, Iowa. And next to Chris, we have Pervin Saket, who is a poet, a novelist, and editor from India. She is the author of the novel Urmila, the poetry collection A Tinge of Turmeric, and a series of 10 biographies in verse for children. Her most recent poetry manuscript was a finalist for the Gaudy Boy Prize and the Wheelbarrow Books Prize 2024. She works as an editor for academic textbooks, serves as a poetry editor for the Bombay Literary Magazine, and is currently writing her second novel, which is lovely. She is a fall 2024 writer-in-residence with us at the International Writing Program. So I am going to repose the questions that were read, noting that the 3 questions are very different and are asking about different things. So place and setting. How do you convey a sense of place or paint a unique landscape? To me, this sounds like a craft question. The second question is, in what ways does location contribute to your writing, which sounds like a process question. And then the last question, can the literary work truly be universal? Will place always determine how a piece is understood? That sounds like a reader response question. So I will pose them all to you with the hope that we will talk about craft, process, and reader response over the course of the next maybe 40 minutes, and then we'll have time for questions after that. So maybe we'll just start right here with you, Forrest, if that's okay. Sorry, you're next to me.
Okay. Just to respond to any of those questions?
Yes, so
or-
respond to any of those, and then I'll kind of try to circle around if we miss any of them.
So I have a degree in geology, and all of my work is very oriented around place and in connection with place. And so my most recent book, Mojave Ghost, concerns sort of the interior. After my wife and my mother and my sister died very very close together, I felt very ungrounded and began to hike. I couldn't concentrate. I began to hike the San Andreas Fault. It's an 800-mile fault down through California. And I hiked much of it. You can't, it's not, if you haven't seen faults before, it's not just like a line that you walk down. It's often very invisible, and you hike a long time before you see some detail that shows the faulting. But that became a kind of what I realized as I was hiking the fault was that the faults inside myself were manifest in the very landscape that I was walking in. And I often find that our surround and our interior are related, which has led me to an interest in Sangam poetry, which was a really important poetry 2,000 years ago in southern India, Tamil Nadu. And in Sangam poetry, it was considered, for 300 years, this body of literature, great, you know it, was kind of the gem of southern India poetics. And it was believed in the Akam trajectory of Sangam poetry that it was not only unethical to write about the self without involving the landscape around you, but it was impossible because what's around us is constantly influencing us. And it's not a very Western idea where, where we have philosophers that say, I think, therefore I am, as if you could think without being thinking in a place and in context to that place. So landscape is critical, and our surround, I think cityscape also, whatever is around us, is influencing the rhythm of our thoughts, the rhythm of our perceptions, and I'm interested in trying to write into that.
So I'm next. Can you hear me? Yes. Yeah. So I was really interested in this topic because it had to do with my novel. I've written 4 nonfiction books and 1 novel. And I'm interested in the landscape question, actually. So how do you turn landscape into a significant place? I used to get really bored in museums when I saw landscape paintings. Turner, John Constable, even Monet's water lilies. They for me, they sounded very boring because I needed humans in my heart, in my writing. Even when I was reading a book and there was a description of a landscape, I'd skip that part. Until one day, I became the involuntary owner of plots of land. I inherited small plots of land in my grandparents' village. So they came to me as names written in a sheet of paper. And I know they meant everything to my grandparents, but for me they didn't mean anything. Both my grandparents were dead. I didn't have anyone to take me there. And I thought, how can these really small plots of land mean everything to just one generation ago and nothing to me? So my novel started with that idea. So, and actually they were really small. My novel is called Little Lands, and it's not translated into English, but the idea of smallness, it's conveyed in the cover because letters don't fit in the line. So they were really small plots of land. If I was, laying on the ground, they would be around my height. So I realized that for my generation, land was something to avoid or something to photograph, to put on Instagram or Facebook, to see through a window. and something that made you dirty. So I felt nothing, but I thought I'm going to write about this. And how do I turn landscape that meant nothing, actually the landscape, into something? And for that I used potatoes. They became my threads, my muses. They were like the umbilical cord, because I remembered my we moved, my parents' generation moved to the city, but when we came back to the village, our grandparents gave us potatoes to bring to the city. Although we didn't need them, it was like a gift. And I realized that they were actually umbilical cords, so I was able to turn landscape into a significant place using potatoes. They were like descendants of the land. So that's my experience in creating a sense of place. Thank you.
Thanks everybody for being here, especially my fellow writers. We're here because it's so early in the morning. So I write something to discuss the questions. In a way, I believe that where you were born constitutes yourself and molds your own literature. In my country, there is a famous sentence the Spanish philosopher Paul Grusat said: "Is the lack of horizon what constitutes Argentines?" And another question arises that I'm not interested in answering is, what defines being Argentine? Because for me, even though a landscape can shape the way you see life, identity is not something you are born with, it's something you build. When you decide to write, you know you're going to live on a diaspora, but you will carry language with you no matter where you move. And that's how you convey a sense of place. For me, literature is a voice, and the voice resembles a walk, not to move from one place to another, but a circular walk, which has no place to arrive at, but only to go around itself in the surrender to pure movement and becoming. The literature that interests me, like the very act of walking, is a subject that is always deviating. The other day, I was sitting on a bench near our hotel, and suddenly a bird appeared. And I could see the sky surrounded by trees, and I was transported myself to a field. I remember I thought, you are in a city, but suddenly you are not in a city, you are in the field. And I believe literature is kind of that. You transport yourself to a different world, and that is why naming can turn a space into place. Returning to the Paul Grusat sentence, of course, it was said more than 100 years ago, but something of that sentence continued rambling in my head and made me write a novel. So, if a landscape can shape the way you see life, what is the countryside? The place where every Argentine cannot see the horizon? We have the plain pampas where everything is green and we don't distinguish from one another. So, just to say, our landscape is very similar to Iowa landscape. You know the field? They are very similar. And our literature is found on that myth. What matters to me above all is the Pampian fantasy of how much a vast landscape shapes or modifies a character, the resignification given to the world plains, but above all, the relationship between imaginary and territory. In fact, in the novel, I want the countryside to be imaginary, to be in La Pampa, but it is not clear where it's at all. The literature that interests me has to do with imagination. As Cesar Aira, like he was candidate for the Nobel Prize, he's an Argentine writer, once said, "The Pampa is emptiness, and the emptiness must be filled up with imagination." But we don't have to forget the artifice of the word landscape, all that this word leaves out when it is named. To say landscape is to impose a certain order. One needs to employ a frame, real or imaginary, to determine a place. The novel emphasized that the idea of landscape, my novel, does not define a pre-existing space, but rather a creation of the observer, the conception of an order and a series of relationships in nature. In so much, the landscape functions as a space where the feeling of the main character are reflected, like I wrote on a poem. To speak of the landscape is in the end talking about yourself. Well, now I connect with what Forrest says about that, how the surroundings and the interior are related, because I also believe in that, you know. So, and also, to use another word, because writers do that, we need to quote. So I really like Annie Ernaux, where she said that one discovers oneself more projecting oneself to the outside world than in the introspection of the intimacy diary. So I also believe in that. I have always been interested in the rhetorical figure of displacement. The character cannot say in words what is happening to her, and the narrator seeks, by speaking of the landscape and with syntax, to convey the state the character is going through. In that sense, I remember when I read Death in Persia by Annemarie Schwarzenberg, which is a writer from German, that the narrator never said that the character was sad, but all the time she spoke of the desolation of that landscape. In this case, I think that in what I wrote, the exact opposite happens. The character introduces her sadness into the landscape and vice versa, and I quote, "She naively believes that if she decides to stay a long time in a territory, something of his personality can be transferred to the landscape. She is someone who is in pause and seeks in the landscape what she cannot find in words." So to sum up, this is like the last paragraph. The way I used to convey a sense of place in my writing, I need the inner harmony you find in nature. I need nature to read and write. I need nature to quiet down and empty myself. I need nature to breathe. Sometimes I like to express with the Japanese word shrinshoku. It's the forest bath, the simple and therapeutic act of spending time in a forest. And I believe here is when literature appears, when you empty yourself from other voices, allowing your inner voice to appear, and at the same time, you make a dialogue with dead writers who were before you, when you have to find words to explain feeling or needs. For me, literature is like finding a place. My teachers are not only poets and writers, but also rivers, mountains, stones, and animals. Thank you.
I have, can you hear me okay? I have the idea that we are, all of us, not just writers, are deeply imprinted by the landscape that we grow up on. You know, if you live on an island, you presumably eat a lot of fish. If you live on a river, you have a relationship with that. I grew up in literally in the woods in the middle of a national forest. There was only 200 people, and there was a lot more animals than human beings. More birds, wildflowers, snakes, squirrels, deer, all the animals, and butterflies, and creeks, and trees. So this was more important to me than the life I had within my family. And I think it made me who I am as a person, but also as a writer. I also think that this is true for each of us, no matter where we grow up, whether it's in a city or on a coast or in the middle of the Midwest in Iowa. We are influenced by the environment that we spend our significant early days in. And as a result, that's what I write about. I don't see it separate from me or from my characters. And the land at home, which I set most of my work where I grew up, the land there was bigger than any human being. It was bigger than, it was mountains, and I spent a lot of time alone wandering around. And I think it's inescapable. A sense of place for me, but for anybody. You know, the idea of geography is destiny. is limited and, a little pithy, but there's some truth to it. And I could keep on going, or I could just pass the baton. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I'll build on that. I write from Mumbai, which is very, very different from Iowa City, and it's crazy and messy, chaotic, noisy, full of people, potholes, stray animals. It is an overdose in every way possible. But when I wrote my novel, Urmila, I thought I was writing an interior novel. It's inspired by an Indian epic. It's a feminist retelling of the epic, the Ramayana, and it's entirely about how the story plays out in my character's mind. So I was very surprised to receive reader responses that referenced Bombay in a very real way. And I think that brings up what Forrest was saying earlier, that this separation between the interior and the exterior is an artificial one. And thank God for that, because talking about perhaps the third part of your question, Kate, about whether these kinds of uniquely particular spaces can transcend and can be relevant universally, I find that that entirely so, that universality is not an act of having a shared experience, but of being able to make a leap and to make a connection with, and to move out of our skin, our own genders, our race, our countries, our religions, and to reach out and make a connection with someone else. And it is the specifics which allows for that. In many ways, the universal is an imaginative act. And in order to complete this imagination, we need particulars, we need details, we need specifics, which is why something like Grapes of Wrath or something like To Kill a Mockingbird has so many readers in India. You would think, otherwise, why would Indian readers care about it? Or Midnight's Children has so many readers in the U.S. So I think these, the more specific we get, the more we can allow, give clues which allow others to fill in this act of imagination and to extend a hand across time and place and arrive at a universal human condition or a human emotion. Yeah.
Can I just,
Yeah.
can you hear me? Just, I was thinking of that. But the other day we were invited to go to a farm here in Iowa, a corn farm. And I was talking about my book, about people being ashamed of their rural origins. And at the end, a lady came to see me, and she said, it really resonated with me. And I found it real. Her name was Janelle. She was wearing cowboy boots. And my novels happens in the northern village of Portugal. And I thought it was really interesting because she came up to me and said, I really identified with what you had to say. Because when I moved to the city, I really felt ashamed of where I was from, my rural origins, and she pointed at her boots. They made fun of my boots, and it was a sort of. I really felt, oh, she's an Iowan, and she can connect with my book. So it's really interesting. When you try to be universal, it's not good. Try to be local. Try to be you, and then universality happens. People connect.
Yeah. Well, I saw many of you writing things down, so why don't I give anybody a chance to respond to some of the other things that folks said, and then if I can ask some questions too.
Are we supposed to write stuff down?
You don't have to, but we're passing out pens, and I'm seeing scribbling, which tells me maybe folks have thoughts.
I'm ready.
You'll write some things down?
Yeah.
Okay. But I saw some of that, so I want to give you a chance to respond to one another's initial comments.
I might need a bigger piece of paper.
You do? Shall I bring you one? Okay.
Yeah, I have a page that's full of comments.
You all do. Do you want to start?
Sure. I could talk. Maybe I would love to talk about it seems right now that we're writing about place and character and the connection between them rather intuitively. But I do want to emphasize that there is, like Kate said, an element of craft that's involved in these decisions. And for instance, in my classes, we examine place through. We have this very special place in India on the banks of the river Ganga, which is considered a holy river. And that particular spot is where a lot of Hindus would go for their last rites, for the cremation rites. And it's called Manikarnika Ghat. And this place features, I mean, you could write a whole, you could have a bookshelf full of Manikarnika Ghat books because it's such an important place. And when I think about 3 specific writers who use this place, and we talk about the choices that are made in representing that place. For instance, there's this The River of Gods by Ian MacDonald, and he talks about this place in India as 100 years in the future after independence. And because of the readership, and I'm assuming also where the author comes from, there is an element of hyper-awareness of the place. Every single sound, every single sight, it is noticed and it is described. It's almost a spectacle, the place over there, which it would be for somebody who's coming from outside. But another author, for instance, Bharti Mukherjee, who's a diaspora writer, who's kind of bridging the space between India and the West, will write about the same place with a certain knowledge, assumed knowledge of that place, and assumed knowledge for the reader as well. But I noticed, for instance, she uses Hindi words for things that have English words. There are perfectly acceptable English versions of those words, but she will use it to evoke that sense of place or the mood or the tone or the textures of that place. Or someone else who's, for instance, Manju Kapoor, who writes a book called Difficult Daughters, she also writes about that place where the daughter has gone for the last rites of her mother, and it's entirely interior. She's not describing the road, she's not describing the beggars, she's not describing the food or the sunset or the poverty or the colors or any of those things. It's entirely about the relationship with the mother who has passed away. And I think that's because she's writing for a very, very local audience. And if she just says Manikarnika Ghat or she just says the Ganga, the people are already filling in all of those details. Her readers are filling in those details. So a lot of how we choose to approach place perhaps has to do with how our relationship to that place and our readers' relationship to that place as well. So we're not entirely working in a default manner. Yeah.
No, I just add something that even though I seem to grow up in the countryside for my text, I really didn't. I grew up in a city like Mumbai. Buenos Aires is crowded and full of people, so I wanted to live that. That's why I sublimate my wishes in literature. That's why I believe literature is so magic. Like I invented a countryside. I have people when read my book, they believe me I was in the countryside, but I invented it. I imagine it reading books about that, for example, Annie Dillard and also Thoreau and David Shore Haskell. So I think in that way you convey a sense of place with words, because I wanted that landscape. Like I was looking at my plant, that is like a small plant, and with a small plant I invaded a countryside. So that's why literature for me is so important. Because I don't carry nature with me. I invented it. So.
Wow. I carry nature with me everywhere.
I envy you. I wish I did.
Well, it was not a great... It was pretty lonely as a child, I tell you that, in the woods. But I don't... When I write, I don't separate... I don't think of place as a separate thing. To me, it's the hills or Iowa. I've set work at different places I've lived is as much of a character as the human being, and I believe that. That's how I see it. That's how I interact with it. Whether it's driving around outside of town right now. Last night, yesterday, I drove with Willie. It was beautiful light. They're cutting down the last of the corn, and there's dust in the air, and you can see the bottom of the Devonian Sea that was here before in the prehistoric era, and it's like, this is land. It is speaking to me. In a city, I get lost within 30 steps and become overwhelmed by sound, smell, sight, everything. But when I'm walking around in the country or in any countryside, I feel more comfortable. And then when I write, I just think of the land as a character with its own characteristics. And I don't mean a metaphysical way. I mean, sometimes it can veer into that. If I'm alone in the woods too long, I start making things up. But that's how I approach it. And as far as to get to the universal, I think the best way to get to the universal is to write personal. That's what I mean. I think that's the only way. If you try to write universal, you get nothing. You just get some kind of grand overview of junk. But if you write personally and personally enough, then it will translate to the reader and they will often be able to relate, because when it comes down to it, we're all human beings and we all think and feel, and we've experienced loss and joy and sorrow and happiness and laughter. And those are the universal aspects that link us as people. Okay. That's it for my notes.
Keep writing.
I'll mark them off now.
We seem to be much agreed up here. There are some brilliant things my fellow panelists have said that bring up issues about language. Nurit said that naming turns space into place. I love that. I'm going to quote it without attributing her from now on. And Pervin was talking about the maintaining Hindi words in an English, basically English text, because of the texture of that language, which communicates something very particular. Again, the particularity of the language. When Petrarch writes, he just uses, he references to flowers, the flowers growing along the river Arno. But for the audience that he was writing for, those flowers were very particular. So maybe a good translator wouldn't simply use flowers, but would use something particular, because all of his audience would have seen the kind of flower that grows along the Arno River. And those are ethical choices, I think, that we make as translators as well, as to how we translate and maybe sometimes incorporate other languages into English. And I think that's what keeps English a living language, is the contamination of other languages is what gives English life. I think when a language stops changing, it dies, and that translation is one of the great acts for making a language more supple, and that relates to place.
Well, about translation, like what did you say recently, is like, for example, I figure out, how do you translate April is the cruelest month? Because April in my country is not cruel. It's better. It's a good month. So it's like, we have to change the month because it's spring, or we have to keep April. So that's the question, because the place. So.
Yes. I have to say that as a child, I would come across this quote that says, in every life there is a little rain. And I thought that meant in every life there is a little joy. whereas it's supposed to be the opposite. Because in India, rain is joyous. It is celebrated. There are songs around rain. It is the time of fertility and romance and reproduction, and it is just gorgeous after the oppressive heat. So it's very interesting to see how it's not just a translation across languages, but across place, and how the language means something else in a different place.
And it's that particularity again.
Yeah.
There's a word in Kannada, my wife's language. I wish I could remember. Maybe somebody here knows. Godhilui.
Okay.
But it's-
Godhuli? Do you mean Godhuli?
Yeah, that's it.
Yes.
Yeah. So it could be translated as twilight, but literally it means cow dust time.
Yeah.
Because when the cows come in at twilight. So it would be a crime to translate it simply as twilight, which is a more generic term.
Right.
Cow dusk is beautiful.
Yeah.
It's much more. It's not just Plutarch who does that, because when I started reading in earnest and trying to, learn rather than just read to escape I noticed, one of the first things I noticed that most writers when they wrote about, first of all, they were mostly set in cities and or suburbs, and then if they were had any rural environment, they were just a generic thing. There was these trees over here as we walked past a bunch of trees, or there's a beautiful garden of flowers, and I thought I don't like this. So I decided when I wrote, I would always be as specific as possible with every single type of bird, type of flower, the nut, and a walnut or a hickory nut, which there's a lot of in Iowa City falling right now. They have different hulls, and they look differently, and they fall apart differently, and that's what I tried to do. It also, I wound up having to get a lot of reference books because so I could make sure that I was correct. And then as a result, though, I think it makes the work, it contributes to the specificity of place, which then contributes to the universality, I would hope. I tried to circle that around to that.
Going back to something Chris said, for me, it was actually, I was born and raised in Lisbon, which is the capital of Portugal. For me, nature was really disorientating. I felt really lost. And I need street names and door and numbers. And actually, my novel was about trying to change that. And it changed because when the protagonist tries to find the lands that she inherited, she cannot go back because she started taking photographs of trees and rocks, but the trees changed and the rocks, they also changed because lichens grow. But I think my protagonist changed her view of nature, and so did I, because I had to do research. I had to study the landscape. I had not to get lost.
Yeah.
So that changed for me a bit. But for me, rocks and trees were like streets. I looked at them as streets. This is the street with the tree. This was the avenue with the rock. But I had to bring my language of the city into nature, so as not to get lost.
I mean, I think that's a great idea. To me, street names are just interchangeable and confusing. Every town in America has a Washington Street, for example. This town has Muscatine and Lower Muscatine. It's not lower than anything, and it's just and how am I supposed to drive a car and not run into anything, and then look at these names
Walking.
that you can't, that are sometimes obscured by trees or...
They're on Google Maps. Nature's not.
No, I have never gotten lost in the woods.
Oh,
Lucky
you.
I was once bewildered, though, for a couple of days. But I mean, I can get lost in a city, but then I can go to find a tree that I went to 10 years ago. It's different.
I need people.
What?
People to ask directions. I love asking directions. It's the way to interact.
I never can remember. It's like you go up here and make a left, and then a left, and then a right. Like, what? On Washington Street? Oh, yeah, okay.
But may I just add to that what Chris said about every city having a certain name. In India, every city has a road called MG Road, which is Mahatma Gandhi Road. Right. And one generation before me, this really helped women. Because when women were traveling around for work and they would stay in hotels, the hotel, it was old-fashioned, and it would require you to, there was this ledger, and you had to write your address, your name and address. And they didn't want to put their home address in the hotel, so they would write whatever, MG Road, because no one can doubt that. Every city has an MG Road. So that's how, my mother's generation worked with place. Yeah.
Katarina's love for asking directions would get you seriously confused in Mexico, where if you ask people directions, they feel a responsibility to answer whether they know or not.
Right.
I like that. I like getting lost.
Or if you ask somebody who's lived there for a long time, they'll say, well, you just go down here to where the old drugstore used to be.
Yeah.
And then veer right. Where I grew up, the directions were you go to the big oak, keep going.
What if the big oak dies?
Well, it's been around. The last time they was there was still there. And then if you see a barn, you've gone too far. Go back. And like, okay. And I understand.
Well, you all are making this very easy on me. I'm going to ask you one process question based on everything you've talked about. You're talking a lot about specificity, and obviously your very unique perspective on place, both your own but also as a writer, but also language and universality. So the question I'm going to ask you is, when you're drafting, are you thinking about a particular audience? You've brought up this idea that your audience is bringing her identity, her sense of place, her understanding of that particular place, and possibly her own native language to her reading experience. So are you considering a particular audience when you are writing?
Well, I don't know if you're gonna like this answer, but I think in that writers, when I write, not in people that are alive, of course, it's nice to be read by alive people, and it's nice if they tell you, I like your work, but when I write, I intend to make a dialogue with all people that die. So I do that, and I imagine myself, what would the writers say to me, even though they are dead? Or I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 can be alive now, but it's like... I like anachronism, so it's like, of course, we like to be read, but I don't think in people that are alive when I read.
So when you're making decisions like what you were talking about, Pervin, about the specifics, whether you'll use this language or that, you're writing to...
So not in the first draft, not in the first draft, no, because I feel that would be too, it would be dishonest for me to do that. But in subsequent drafts, and I've also found that when my work is published in an American magazine versus an Indian magazine, there is a small modification. There's a small, in terms of, for instance, I have this poem which references a train in what would be a subway or a tube here, a local train in Bombay, and we've got this. And I just mention it and move on because the Indian audience would get it. But there's a detail over there, which is that there are separate compartments for men and women. And in the women's compartments, they carry vegetables with them, and they chop vegetables on their way back home. And when they reach home, they cook those vegetables. So you carry knives and you carry vegetables with you in the train. So when I'm reading this to an American, they want to know about that. Mm-hmm. Right. They don't want me to skip over those details and just make another point. They want to know about that world. So I discovered through the process of working with editors that based where they want more footnotes or greater details in some, and I can understand that, because a lot of what I want to do is to bring a certain world over here. So at perhaps the second draft or third draft or editing stage, there are these adjustments, even with italics, for instance. In India, my books, I made it a point not to italicize a single Indian word.
Good.
Yes, because a dupatta or chappals, which means slippers, all of these are as much ours as English is ours. So it's the register it just seamlessly flows. But I get a sense that here italics emphasize an otherness, a separation, a distance, and I'm not a fan of that. So that's a battle. That's a bit of a battle, yes. Yeah.
Anybody else have thoughts on this or anything?
I don't think I think about audience when I write. I don't know what the audience would be. I'm usually alone in my room. There's nobody there. There's a dog. I'm certainly not writing for my dog. The only time that I ever give consideration to it is like when I think about slang or the a kind of cultural syntax, a way of talking, and then what I've done is I'll just zero in on a few uses or usages of a colloquialism, and then try to write it in a way that the reader will understand from context what it means. Because I think there's nothing worse than when I'm reading and then there's a word that's like, oh, okay, this is a colloquial word, and then there's a halt, a pause, and then the writer defines it for me, and it's like, okay, dude, you like get the job, do it, write it in a way that I can figure it out on my own. So that's what I do, and that's probably the only time I think about who might or might not be reading. Frankly, I am still continually shocked that anybody would read it. It's just me sitting alone in a room making sentences, and my gosh, someone wants to read it, great.
This sort of fascinates me that not a single person up here has said that they write for a particular audience, and I'm like you, Chris. I agree too. I think that writing is a wrestling match with language, with your art, and that's what you're focused on the whole time. And you hope that in that wrestling match, you'll come out with something that an audience will like. But I think if you aim it for an audience, then it will have a lot of generic substance to it, and that there's a lot of writers that do that, and those are the writers I don't read.
It risks become a propaganda and stereotypical material, and that's boring and no dice.
I think I feel a bit like Chris. I assume no one is going to read me because it's really painful. The process I don't enjoy writing. I'm a writer, I know, but I enjoy seeing the result, but the process is not very good. So I feel that everything I'm writing most of the days is meaningless and no one is going to read it. But there are some days when I think, oh, someone might like it, but I don't think about it.
We have 10 minutes, 9 minutes. I am to open it to the audience for questions. Does anybody in the room have a question for the panel? There's a microphone wandering.
I have a burning question.
Oh, great.
A burning question.
So how has the use of words to describe color of landscapes changed over the period of your writing? I'll give you the context for my question. So I grew up in India, and my heritage is from southern India, which is why when the first author mentioned South India and Sangam literature, I was like, wow. So essentially, like in India, we would never typically ask the question, what is your child's color in terms of eyes and hair? It's always black and black, mostly. Whereas here, when a baby is born, you're curious to know what's the color of, and for years and years, my daughter accused me of not knowing her friends because I was not categorically assimilating into me which friend had which eyes and which color of hair. So her descriptors were useless to me. So, because I had not seen variation, so I'm not even accounting for variation within me, so I don't know. So color of landscapes, especially when Chris was talking about Iowa landscapes, after coming to Iowa is when I understood what fall means, what the colors of changing sugar maples, the joy it gives. I had never experienced that. So it's all these small things that really make up the reader's pleasure. And I think I've lost a lot of joys or gained some new ones. But how do you use the sense of color in your writings?
Well, I remember a sentence that is so much green to take in. It's like the character is driving herself crazy because of the greenness. It's like she also says like she needs, like the horizon is so big and she needs like a frame, and she doesn't find a frame because everything is so equal, exactly the same. And that drives her crazy. But I really found it interesting to write about that, and you have to very specific with observation on, to distinguish the colors and also like to read, like she said, you have to be specific if you're gonna speak to a certain place, that the birds are from there, the fauna from there. I studied which animals are from there, which birds are from there, because I wanted to be specific. I named the trees, the birds, like the animals. But I was really happy in doing that. So I don't know. I think you can distinguish different kinds of green, and if you like stay still for 10 minutes, you are gonna discover that. But you need to empty. You need to observe it and be quiet. So yeah. And cities are difficult for doing that. Like you can do it in a bench. I did it in front of my hotel. I was like in a bad mood because I was accelerated, and I sit on the bench and I look at the sky and I distinguish the trees. I look at the branches and I was like.
This is interesting because it is changing, and different cultures have different relationships to color. In fact, in the Indian classics, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, there are really, in these huge texts, there are really only 3 colors mentioned in those entire classical genre. In Chinese, the words blue and green are the same word. There's no distinction made. In some cultures, island cultures, there are very few color words, but there's a word for wet and dry as color, color qualities. Lorca, verde, verde, te quiero verde, green, green, I want you green, is so full of emotion. But how would that translate into Chinese? But in this way, through translation, our languages are changing each other's cultures and their relations to color.
I just want to react on this, because talking about writing your landscape, your landscape decides everything about you. You said, maybe you are writing to your dog more than to other people, any other readers, which is quite normal. The landscape justifies this. You have animals, you have trees, so you are more concerned with that. The reader too, he reads, from his own landscape. You cannot get rid of your landscape, neither while writing nor when you're reading. And here translation creates a problem, because I love your idea about the colors and how it's the same even for notions, for words. I'm thinking of one great Arab poet, an Iraqi called Badr Shakir Sayyab, who has a wonderful poem that everybody repeats in the Arab word, and it starts with matar, 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 and people love it. And it's so cheerful. But when it was translated to German, And then I will translate matar, matar, matar to English. It was rain, rain, rain. And people do not love it. It's not cheerful at all because they are fed up with the rain.
That's perfect. Like
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
I would like to say that you mentioned the sugar maples and not knowing what fall is. My favorite leaf, and yes, I have a favorite leaf, is in fall, and it's a maple, and you can find them now. They start green, and they turn yellow, orange, and red. Now and again, you can find one leaf that has all four of those colors on the same leaf, and that is the most beautiful leaf and my favorite. So keep an eye out for them. You'll see it.
Right.
Little.
Sunlight reflects off of all of those four colors.
Yeah, it's
Right.
and a light rain turns everything into a prism, and then the colors.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. And I'd like to add that this question of using language for color, it's also not only the external color of that leaf or the object or the landscape, but the emotion that color evokes in our heads. For instance, if I say white, for a lot of people, there are associations of purity or wedding dress. But white is a color of mourning in my head. So it's the shroud. So the way we use color is also it's a relationship between the external landscape and our emotional response to that color. Red can be Valentines and hearts, and it can be blood and violence. So how we use it works very closely with what is going on in the character's head and in our story. Yeah.
Well, there is a beautiful book that Maggie Nelson wrote, which is Bluets, and it's about the blue color, which is like this.
And I felt that while I was writing my book, being from the city and being disorientated in nature, I felt that when I touch, for instance, I touched the earth, land, and I remembered only doing that as a child. Children even eat dirt, which is, and I actually did that as well but what I found out that's touching things also changes the way you see colors in a dry green, or for instance in a rock you have so many greens, how to describe them, and if you touch them it helps you describe them.
We are down to our last minute, so I'll just let anyone on the panel have any final thought on sense of place or any of the other topics that have come up. Anybody want to share one last thought?
Thanks for coming.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.